Normal programs that we've done over the years range from short-term renewal programs where you don't camp to programs where you do camp. And in both cases, we have a kind of a three-stage process. An awareness training in the beginning, which is usually the first third of the process. A period of solitude in a very special place in nature. The middle part where you access source and the deepest level of your connectivity to nature and yourself. And then a third stage, which is the re-entry stage, where you come back in. And I created something called tempering a few years ago, where you learn how to integrate what you've received through the training and through the solitude period, how to integrate that back into a normal life flow. And so those are the three basic stages. They're sometimes referred to in modern leadership theory as it's kind of the basis for something called Theory U, because it does have a U shape. The training in the beginning, the exploration of what you're going to be getting into, the tools that you might want to have to be able to go deep, then accessing the deep level of your essence and of deep connection to nature, and then coming out and beginning to bring that back out into the world in a creative way that's well integrated. So the beginner programs, as I said, were these renewal programs, might be half a day. You might spend half a day in the morning going through a training process, the awareness training. Then you might spend the afternoon in solitude in a special place in nature, and then come back together for an evening and late afternoon, a couple of sessions to begin the tempering and re-entry process. In a sacred passage, which involves that first third of the training and the preparation to go into a deep dive into what we call the three natures: outer nature, inner nature, and your true nature. So we work with all three, and we begin mostly by exploring outer nature connection, and then the inner nature connection and refining the perceptions. So we can make a deep connection to outer nature, and later on to inner nature too, and this body that we inhabit, which is nature, how nature shows up in a very intimate way. And then later we begin to go deeper into the true nature, source level of our being, which usually comes after we've grounded ourselves first in the outer and inner nature aspects. So in a sacred passage, the focus is on about 3 or 4 days of pretty deep training. And the training is based upon finding the common ground of all the nature connective and spiritually liberating traditions. What do they all have in common? Or most of them have in common. What are these common ground principles of cultivation and practice? And then we work from those common ground principles to take a deep dive into the essence of ourselves, the essence of this extraordinary nature that we find ourselves part of. And of course, eventually, even connecting into our true source nature as well. The toolkit is extensive. And during that first 3 or 4 days of the awareness training, that's one of the big gifts, really, of the entire process, is to receive those gifts. And they come through a process of sharing teachings that really were distilled from many of the great lineages around the planet. And also from the capacity of direct transmission. If you have a teacher who embodies these core principles of cultivation and practices, then you're very lucky, because you can receive through the field the power of transmission as well. A lot of my own teachers, I was gifted with that aspect. It was really a huge gift. Probably made one of the biggest differences in my own life, that power of transmission, direct. It's hard to talk about in the West, because until more recently, as we got into quantum physics and quantum theory and mechanics, we began to realize that actually all parts of a field particle wave behavior patterns, which involve a kind of a matrix of interconnectivity in a field, a kind of field behavior which we're all woven into. And in Eastern terms, that's called the field which opens the power of transmission. And if you're truly open, relaxed, and receptive, then that power of transmission can operate, especially if you have good loving energy in the field. So we use that power along with the power of the fact that we're already perfectly liberated in our essence. That's the first power that we work with. And we bring that in very early on in the awareness training, so we can take a deep dive into initially into that connection to outer nature and to the field of the emotions, the thoughts, their obscurations, their blockages, but also, in a positive sense, learning how to refine and cultivate our senses in the fields of what we call the fields of experience, which are sight and sound and touch initially. Then later on we go deeper into taste and smell, and then we move to movement and balance, and then the actual comprehension of the energy flows in our being in the chakras and in the meridians and the vessels that flow through our system. So those 7 fields of sight, sound, taste, smell, touch, balance, and movement, and energy comprehension and experience are the basis for a lot of our training of how to connect. And you connect with each of those fields. And by refining those fields so they can become more precise and more sensitive, you make profoundly deep connections to the world of nature. You become really connected to the whole family of all living things. You were sharing, Brad, about having a great experience yesterday with a bear who came up and was very close to you, just came up and hung out. As you open the heart and your loving energy begins to pervade the field, then animals and plants and birds, beings of nature begin to show up and interact with you in a very different way than they would in, let's say, somebody going out to hunt them or just look on them as something, a passing thing that they're not really connected to in the outer world. So one of the features of our process is it bonds you so deeply with nature that nature begins to show up in a very special, sacred, and intimate way. And all that is because of the toolkit that you receive during the awareness training, the first third of the entire process that you do, whether it's a sacred passage or a renewal program. For the passages, as I mentioned, the first third is that deep, going deep with these amazing tools for working with the fields of experience and some other aspects as well that allow us to go into deep connectivity with the whole family of living things. And then apply the same things to sensing, what am I feeling? What am I experiencing? What are my emotions? And then going a little deeper, what are my thoughts? What are my intentions? What am I experiencing? How am I working with this experience of this immersion in nature and in life in general once I leave? And beginning to tune into how the mind begins to relate to the emotions, and the emotions begin to relate to experiences in your past and worries about the future that might create blockages. We work especially in the toolkit that we provide during the training, a toolkit to help relieve the problems of lack of presence, which means an obsessive quality of distraction fills our lives. I'd say the most common thing I notice these days in the high-paced, fast life that we live in modern times, it's very hard for people to be truly present and centered in the joy of being completely at one with whatever they're doing. Mostly they're constantly being distracted by patterns from the outside world, TV, telephone, computer, the boss contacting you to do one more thing, or the family coming up with many things that you've got to attend to. There are endless numbers of things that take the mind up and turn it into a speed trip. and put it into a distracted state which is not very present in the moment. The training teaches us how to be completely in the here and now and at one with what's arising in the moment. In fact, I often like to say if we're successful in that, the moment becomes the oment. We really arrive in a deeply sacred connection to the now. In order to do that, however, the other major obstacle, aside from the distraction that blocks presence, is the problems of relaxation, lack of relaxation. Most of us are very contracted, with lives with lots of tension, and these tensions tend to create a state of deep blockage, which then prevent the capacity to relax into the now and to be really present. So we emphasize a great deal developing the power of relaxation as we train people in preparation for going through the entire way of nature process. So learning how to be very relaxed and deeply present, that partnership are the two keys to really opening deep connectivity. The relaxation helps dissolve the patterns of contraction and separation. The presencing allows you to be completely in the now, so the field of being at one with whatever's going on within you, emotionally or experientially, or in your thoughts, and in your connections with outer nature. Whatever's going on, you're fully present with it. So there's no separation from being with it in its wholeness. When you're fully present with something in a relaxed state, then life becomes a lot more joyful and can actually become a flow of present moments that are present moments, which are inherently joyful and even carry a certain bliss of life, which many of the great spiritual traditions point to as one of the great gifts of really releasing distraction and contraction of life. In the Buddhist tradition, that's called samsara. In the Taoist tradition, it might be called the blockages and the obscurations that prevent one from being able to flow with life. So a lot of our training, and the awareness training, is about really laying the groundwork for being able to flow with life in a beautiful, harmonious way, just like water flows through a beautiful stream or in a current that you're caught up with as you pedal down a river or as you swim in the ocean. Opens up the joy of life. So once you perceive those things in the sacred passage process, then you drop into the period of solitude, which we used to call it the period of solitude or solo time. But then I noticed in my own experience, I began doing it very young, as a pre-teenager, but I never really was alone. I was always with the birds and the plants and the animals and the elements. And it was an incredibly joyful experience. And I began to bond very deeply with the big family of all living things, such as we have right here. In doing that, I realized that I was never really alone, even though my parents, when they put me out at age 7, said, "John, you're ready to be completely alone." And I said, "Well, yes." And then I came back and they said, "Was it scary? Was it difficult?" I said, "Well, it could be a little bit different, but I never really felt alone. I felt very much at one with everything." So I began to change the term from alone time or solo time to all one time. And we use that term now for the middle part of the way nature process. First the training, then the all one time as you drop deep into nature. And during that time, you're there alone in part because it allows the connection of the senses and your whole experience to really bond very deeply with a big family of all living things. And that solitude means there's no distractions from human culture, from the news, from TV, from computers, from cell phones, all that stuff and problems that friends and family are having, all the things that normally fill our lives, and the work, of course, that we do. So that solitude is really helpful because you're disconnecting for a little while from the normal human cultural context and dropping into a very simple connection to nature, inner nature and outer nature. And ultimately, you can even arrive at true nature as you go deeper and deeper and deeper. Then when you've done that, often what happens is there's a tremendous upwelling of creativity. Because you've no longer been suppressing deeper insight and creative potential arising from your deeper levels of your own true nature, things begin to come through to you that are creative responses to life and situations in life that you may be dealing with. Those deep insights are pure gold for many people. In the business world, that becomes a pulling of creativity that can be applied to your work in the outer world to make a living. In your personal life, it may bring through insights of how to come into a better relationship with friends, family, and loved ones, or enemies for that matter. In an ecological sense, it lays the ground for seeing that we're really part of a big family of all living things. It's magnificent. And that lays the groundwork for helping create a much more harmonious human culture that's in true balance with the rest of all living things, which we obviously need, given what obviously is happening around the planet these days through environmental change and transformation, through lack of attention to coming into harmonious balance with the big family of all living things. So when you come back out of the period of solitude, you've received a lot of creative insight, as well as this gift of connection. And that insight then, part of that last third of the process, be it a sacred passage or a renewal program, the short one, is to integrate that into your normal life flow so that the gifts are not lost. I noticed many years ago, people often would go through a retreat process, be a wonderful retreat, they'd have a great teacher, have great insights, some real openings, but then they come back out, they feel really changed, they come right back out and drop right back into the same patterns of obscuration, tension, contraction, and distraction, and they would lose many of the gifts of doing the retreat. I decided the way of nature process would take the opposite approach. It would put a lot of the emphasis on that final third of the process where you learn how to integrate what's been received during the first two parts of the process and integrate that into your normal life flow. So these gifts begin to grow and flourish and become a new way of being. If you talk to people that have done passages or renewal programs over the years, very often you hear back years later, oh my God, this completely changed my life. I received insights that absolutely transformed me and made a huge difference in everything that took place later. We hear that again and again and again. I've been doing this long enough, 50, 60 years, so I can definitely testify to that. So we know this process works, but over the years I've been improving this integration process when you come back out. And we now have a thing called tempering, where you learn how to, once you come out of your solo camp, you begin to recontract and redistract as you begin to reconnect with human culture again. That's the moment at which to apply presencing and deep relaxation. So you learn how to relax in a sensitive way into whatever you're beginning to tense it up against. And you learn how to become more present as the mind begins to be pulled more and more towards a distracted state. And this is wonderful. If you come out with that understanding that the invitation is to relax into what normally created contractions and to become more present in situations that normally created more distraction. You become more present. So you become more present and more relaxed in situations that normally contracted and distracted you. That's huge. And as you go deeper and deeper with that process, so you come out and you practice that as you begin to interact with others again in the little community that you went out with and with your teachers. And and you begin to meet a few other people in the community nearby where the program is happening, we consciously go out into the broader community at that time so people can begin to see, can I relax and be fully present as I begin to interact with other humans and normal life again. And pay attention to every moment you begin to re-distract and recontract. And practice reopening, relaxing, resettling into a normal life flow in a more joyful way of existing. So you bring the gifts of the first 2/3 of the process right out into the dynamic flow of everyday life. That becomes the focal point for the last third of the wave nature process. We also do a lot of sharing. We share a story, what's happened at all kinds of levels, our relationship to outer nature, what's happened to us internally with our emotions, what's happened with our creativity and our thought flow. Have we been able to touch into pure source awareness? Just have a little taste of it. So we begin to tap into that immutable, unchanging, fully liberated essence within that lies at the root of all of our being and with all of nature as well. So those three parts are really what make up the wave nature process. Whether you're in a short renewal program of, say, a day or two, where you don't even have to camp. In a renewal program, as I said, you do the awareness training the first third, maybe in the morning, do the second third of some solitude time in the afternoon. Then in the late afternoon and evening, you do the sharing and tempering process for the re-entry and tempering aspect. You might do that for one day, you might do that for 2 or 3 days even. In some cases, I've done that for a full week. There's no camping involved. The entire program is just doing a week of doing that. It can be very powerful. And then you come back out with something that is a real gift that remains and lasts. If you're doing a passage which goes much deeper, where you have 10, 11, 12 days of deep connection to these three natures, outer, inner, and true nature, then of course the process can be cultivated at a much deeper level and the results are even more profound. So I generally recommend people, if they can, try to do, after maybe some initial work with us, go deeper with either a sacred passage or a slightly shorter version that we call the Nature Quest. And but those three programs, the initial one, the renewal program, the intermediate one, the Nature Quest, might be anywhere from 6 or 7 days up until 8 or 9. And then finally the sacred passage, which is normally about 11 or 12 days. And then if you want to go deeper, we offer quite a few specialized programs, taking a deep dive into how do you cultivate life force, the chi, the beauty of the energy that flows through our systems. Another focal point is, how do we make an authentic connection to our true nature, using the tools that have come in from many of the world's great traditions? How do we connect the elements of life, of nature? How do we connect with the earth? How do we connect with the water? How do we connect with the fire element of the sun and the stars and the fire within? How do we connect with the air element? How do we connect with space, the element of space? How do we connect with the trees and the wood element? How do we connect with water and the beautiful flows of water that flow in our bodies and flow in nature all around us? So we have a number of focal point retreats just working with the elements. We also have a number of programs that work on the transformation of shadows and obscurations and help us go deeper with the transformation of these shadow aspects. So if you'd like to go deeper, you can do that. We also offer longer programs of a month and a half, or even up to 3 months of deep solitude in nature, with a bit of work directly with me during that solitude time. I come in once a week to refine the processes and the practices. And those programs, of course, are incredible. You come out of that quite transformed and changed. So there's a progression from the initial renewal programs and the beginners programs to the nature quests. Takes you a bit deeper, and you begin to camp. To the sacred passage, you go quite a bit deeper and have the full experience of the way of nature process, to then have the option to go deep into different facets of what we have to offer. If you want to go really deep and refine those aspects, or you can go into the longer periods of these month-long, month-and-a-half-long, or even 3-month-long processes. And we even occasionally take a training process and do that for up to 1, 2, 3, even 4 years. We go deep into an advanced training process. For most of those are focused on very strong shadow transformation and connection to source. And of course that takes quite a commitment of your own time and your life force to take that deep dive. But that's necessary if you really want to go deep. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's a bit of a sketch of the overall wave nature process and how it expresses itself. And very often people I've noticed in the past, because you have alone time in nature or AllOne time in nature, they kind of fixate on that because it's so unusual. But it's done very safely. You have a buddy. It's very secure. We do it in places where there's really no danger of any kind. And unless you do something foolish yourself. We've never had a major problem with animals or anything in the outer environmental world that's been serious from over 60 years of my doing this. So it's a very safe process, and that solitude time, we've designed it to be done very, very carefully, and there's very little risk involved with it. But they tend to fixate on that aspect because it is kind of unique. But actually, one of the biggest gifts of the process is the awareness training in the beginning and the re-entry tempering, and learning how to integrate what you've gained into normal life flow at the end of the 3-stage process itself. And so I wanted to mention a little bit more about those beginning parts, the first third and the last third, because they're so critical to making this whole thing work. It's taken me years to really refine them, cultivate them, and make sure that they are really serving all my students and all my friends that go through this. And the feedback we're getting seems to indicate it's been very successful and has been very, very helpful and helped change in a positive way so many lives. So that's the wave nature process in a nutshell, with a bit more emphasis on the first third and the last third.